13-year-old Jamal Carter was the kind of student who could easily go unnoticed in a busy classroom. At Riverside Middle School in Atlanta, Georgia, Jamal preferred the quiet corner seat by the window, where he could observe the world beyond the glass rather than participate in the buzz of classroom activity. With warm autumn light pouring through the windows and the gentle sway of trees outside, he often found himself drifting into deep thought. To most of his classmates and even his teacher, Jamal appeared disinterested or distracted. His brown eyes, sharp but distant, gave the impression that he wasn't fully present. But behind that quiet demeanor was a brilliant mind, one that processed numbers and patterns at a speed far beyond that of an average eighth grader. Jamal wasn't uninterested in math, on the contrary, he loved it. But the repetitive nature of classroom lessons left him unchallenged and uninspired. While other students filled their notebooks with exercises and assignments, Jamal's pages were mostly blank, except for the margins where he had scribbled complex equations and solutions during moments of boredom. Math was his private passion, a world he explored on his own terms. He didn't raise his hand or compete for attention because, deep down, he felt safer fading into the background. There was comfort in invisibility, less pressure, fewer expectations. Yet, what others perceived as laziness or apathy was actually quiet genius waiting to be seen. Jamal's intelligence wasn't loud, it didn't demand the spotlight, but it was there, in the calm way he approached problems, in the unspoken excitement he felt when solving equations in his head, and in the quiet confidence that came from knowing he was capable of much more than anyone around him realized. Though overlooked, Jamal carried a powerful gift inside him. All he needed was a moment, a single opportunity to show what he could do. Until then, he would keep watching the world from his window seat, dreaming in numbers and letting his mind wander through equations only he understood. What no one knew was that behind that quiet gaze was a math prodigy waiting to be discovered. Everything changed for Jamal Carter one ordinary afternoon when Mrs. Thompson, his no-nonsense math teacher, grew frustrated with the class's poor test results. Known for her high standards and sharp eyes, she scanned the room searching for a student to challenge, her gaze landing on Jamal, the quiet boy near the window who had scored a perfect 100% on the latest test, yet rarely spoke. Though she had often dismissed his silence as apathy, something about his calm detachment irritated her that day. In a moment that surprised everyone, she called him out. "Jamal Carter!" she snapped, startling him from his thoughts. The room fell into an anticipatory hush as every head turned. Jamal's cheeks flushed with heat as he stumbled to his feet. Whispers followed him as he made the long walk to the front of the class, students snickering and speculating about how badly he would fail. At the whiteboard, Mrs. Thompson wrote a complex equation, far beyond their current curriculum, and handed him the marker with a raised eyebrow. Her tone was pointed, almost mocking, as she challenged him to solve it. Jamal stared at the equation, his nerves bubbling beneath the surface. For a moment he considered backing down, but then a quiet determination took over. He remembered the hours spent solving similar problems in solitude, and slowly he began to write. Step by step, his mind broke the equation into manageable parts. The classroom, once filled with skeptical whispers, fell into stunned silence as Jamal's solution took shape with precise logic and elegant structure. Students leaned forward, jaws slack, watching the quiet kid they'd barely noticed reveal a side of himself no one expected. Even Mrs. Thompson, who had assumed this would expose his lack of focus, watched in awe. Jamal, once invisible, was now center stage, not because he sought attention, but because his gift could no longer be hidden. In that moment, everything shifted. He wasn't just a background figure anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. As Jamal stood at the front of the classroom, the weight of his classmates' eyes pressed heavily on his back. Whispers of doubt had filled the air moments earlier, some students expecting him to freeze, others predicting failure. But now, as he began working through the problem on the board, the room grew unusually quiet. Jamal's hand, once hesitant, gained confidence with each step. The complex equation that had seemed like a trap slowly unfolded under his grasp. He approached it with the calm precision of someone who wasn't just solving a problem, but unraveling a puzzle he had already seen 100 times in his mind. His strokes on the whiteboard were smooth, logical, and deliberate. The scattered variables and tricky fractions began falling into place, and the more he wrote, the more captivated the room became. Some students leaned forward in disbelief, their previous smirks replaced with wide-eyed fascination. A few whispered in awe, unsure whether they were more shocked by the speed of his logic or the fact that the quietest kid in class was effortlessly tackling a problem none of them could even begin. At her desk, Mrs. Thompson watched closely, her arms folded, expression unreadable. She had expected hesitation, maybe a mistake or two, but what she witnessed was nothing short of brilliance. Every line Jamal wrote built perfectly on the last, and it was clear he wasn't guessing. He understood exactly what he was doing. When he finally circled the final answer and stepped back, the room was utterly silent. For a few seconds, no one reacted. Then slowly a wave of clapping began. What started as a few tentative applauses soon became a room-wide ovation. Jamal's face flushed, not with shame this time, but with a kind of quiet pride he had never let himself feel. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward and examined the board closely. After a moment of careful review, she turned to the class and said, "This is correct. Every single step." Her voice carried something rare, admiration. Jamal hadn't just impressed his classmates, he had shattered their assumptions. For the first time, the boy who always sat in silence had spoken the loudest, without saying a word. The moment Jamal finished solving the problem on the board, everything began to change. Not just for him, but for everyone in the room. His classmates, who once barely noticed him or dismissed him as the quiet kid, now looked at him with a mix of awe and curiosity. The whispers that had once mocked him were now filled with admiration. A girl leaned over to her friend and whispered, "He's like a math wizard." Others simply stared, mouths slightly open, trying to process what they had just witnessed. For Jamal, who had spent most of his school days trying to stay invisible, the sudden attention was overwhelming. But for the first time, it didn't feel unwelcome. Instead, it felt earned. Even Mrs. Thompson, who had always seen Jamal's silence as a lack of engagement, stood before the class with a changed expression. Gone was the stern look of frustration, replaced by one of realization and quiet respect. She addressed the class with newfound conviction, using Jamal's performance as a teaching moment. "What you just saw wasn't luck. That was real understanding. That's what happens when someone takes the time to master something deeply." Her voice had softened, especially when she turned back to Jamal. She asked him gently why he had never spoken up before. Jamal, still clutching his notebook, simply replied, "I didn't think anyone noticed." That answer hung in the air like a quiet truth that stung more than anyone expected. It wasn't just a personal moment for Jamal. It was a wake-up call for his teacher and peers. For Mrs. Thompson, it was a reminder that potential isn't always loud or obvious. For the students, it was proof that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places. And for Jamal, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he no longer had to hide his gift. The boy who had once blended into the background had now become someone impossible to ignore. In the quiet moments after the class had emptied, Mrs. Thompson asked Jamal to stay behind. What had begun as a simple lesson had turned into a revelation not just for the class but for the teacher herself. She looked at Jamal, not with criticism or impatience, but with sincere curiosity and a sense of responsibility. She admitted she had misjudged him, assuming his silence meant disinterest, when in truth it had been a mask for fear and a desire not to stand out. Jamal, clutching his worn notebook, struggled to find the words to explain himself. He had never wanted attention. Math had always been something he did for himself, in the margins of his life. But now, for the first time, someone saw him for who he was and, more importantly, believed in who he could become. Mrs. Thompson offered him a path forward, an advanced district-level math program designed for students with exceptional talent. It would mean extra work, new challenges, and stepping far outside his comfort zone. At first, Jamal hesitated. The idea thrilled him, but it also scared him. "What if I mess up?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Thompson smiled and replied, "Messing up is part of learning, but if you never try, you'll never know how far you can go." That evening, at the kitchen table, Jamal shared the day's events with his parents. As he described the problem, the applause, and the offer from Mrs. Thompson, his mother reached for his hand, eyes filled with pride. "We've always known you were special," she said. "Now the world is starting to see it, too." His father nodded in agreement, encouraging him to take the opportunity and embrace what made him different. Later that night, Jamal stared at the blank page of his notebook. It no longer felt like a private space, it felt like a doorway. Slowly he began to write, not just numbers but goals, ideas, dreams. For the first time, the boy who had hidden his talent from the world was beginning to imagine a future shaped by it. The next morning, room 32 at Riverside Middle School felt different. As Jamal walked into class, the familiar stares he had grown used to were no longer indifferent or dismissive, they were filled with recognition. A few classmates greeted him with smiles, nods, and even high fives. "Yo, Jamal, that was crazy yesterday," one boy called out. "How'd you even do that?" Jamal, still adjusting to the attention, gave a modest shrug and replied quietly, "I just worked through it." But inside he felt something new: confidence. The boy who had spent years blending into the background was now being seen, not for how loud he was, but for the depth of his mind. Students who had never spoken to him before now asked for his help, wanted to study with him, or simply learn more about how he thought. Jamal no longer felt invisible, he felt valued. Mrs. Thompson, too, had changed. Her once strict and impersonal tone had softened, especially toward Jamal. When she called on him in class, it wasn't to test him, but to encourage him, and when he answered with clear, thoughtful explanations, the class listened with genuine interest. After another impressive response, Mrs. Thompson simply smiled and said, "Excellent. That's the kind of thinking we need more of." After class, she asked Jamal to stay behind once more, but this time it wasn't for reflection, it was for planning. She had spoken with the district's advanced math coordinator, and they were eager to have Jamal join. Twice a week after school, he'd attend classes with students from other schools who shared his passion for mathematics. Jamal hesitated at first, nervous about fitting in, but when Mrs. Thompson assured him he had already proven himself, he smiled and agreed. When he stepped into that advanced class the following week, Jamal felt a familiar, nervous flutter, but it quickly turned into excitement. The problems were harder, the pace faster, and the students just as driven as he was. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. Back at Riverside, he wasn't just the quiet math kid anymore. He had become someone his peers respected and admired. Jamal had once feared being seen. Now he was ready to shine. Jamal's story reminds us that brilliance doesn't always speak the loudest. In a world that often rewards confidence over quiet talent, we must be careful not to overlook those who sit in silence. His journey teaches us that every individual carries unseen potential, and sometimes all it takes is a moment of recognition to bring it to light. For older generations, this story is a powerful reminder of the role we play as parents, teachers, mentors, or simply as observers in encouraging the quiet strengths of those around us. It speaks to the importance of listening deeply, seeing beyond surface behavior, and nurturing gifts that may not yet have found their voice. Just as Mrs. Thompson shifted her perspective and changed a young boy's path, we too can choose to see with greater compassion and curiosity. And for those of us who may feel like our time to grow or be seen has passed, Jamal's courage tells another truth: it's never too late to step forward, never too late to be recognized, and never too late to believe in the quiet power within ourselves. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the greatest wisdom if only we take the time to hear them.